Impact investment is a rapidly growing style of investment, which includes not just financial returns, but also looks at non-financial returns. It goes a bit beyond what people will be familiar with, which is sort of the responsible investment categories that you may know and be familiar with already.
Right.
And investing is the one that is sort of a kind of a version 2.0 of that, where you actually actively seek impact, at the same time still continue to realize financial returns. Right. And for us, that translates into investing in what we call inclusive growth in Africa, which means in those businesses that are focused on including the majority of the population into the economy.
I know, given where the continent is, technology plays a significant part of, I guess, the growth solution going forward. Is that where, I guess, the immediate opportunities lie for investors looking at impact investments?
Correct. What you see is there's an amazing number of opportunities, especially in that field of investing in that inclusive growth. The reason for that is that the formal and the informal economy in many parts of Africa are actually still not connected, and technology is an extremely good way of connecting those two and actually making those two work together much better. And an example of that is mobile banking, mobile wallets, which a phenomenon that everybody will be familiar with if you look at the success of M-Pesa in Kenya, for instance. But it's across Africa, and one of the examples is one in Nigeria, where we have invested a few years back in a company called Paga. They reach already some 5 million users, have some 10,000 agents on the ground. Those agents are, as we would know them, comparable to what you know in South Africa, in spaza shops or across Africa, you have those sort of informal retail points, kiosks, where a large part of the retail transactions are happening, and connecting those to a digital financial system through things like mobile money really enables that informal sector to become part of the formal economy.
Wim, what is the key differentiators that, I guess, in the sector determines who will be successful? Which technological products are going to be successful relative to ones that aren't going to be successful?
Okay, the ones where we see the most exciting developments and where we expect the biggest successes to be in the next few years, and we're seeing that emerging already, is of course the ones that will be successful will be the ones that will be able to scale, not just in one country, but in a number of countries where the model is replicable, and the ones that are able to really use the different kinds of technologies that you need to use to reach the sort of the population that is not included in the mainstream in the provision of services by mainstream companies. The kind of technologies you need to use are things like cloud computing, on-demand services, big data, Internet of Things. The companies that are able to use all of those technologies at the same time in a clever way are the ones that are going to be the winners in the next few years, in the next decade. Actually, we're going to see a huge change in the next decade in Africa through those kinds of technologies and using them at the same time.
The underlying development then of those technologies, is that happening within the continent, or are we getting the development or back work happening elsewhere in the world?
It's both. It's not an either or. What we do see, and what's really exciting in Africa, is that new applications of technologies that are being applied universally around the globe are very specific to the context in Africa. And one example of that is a company that another company we've invested in called Where Smart Transport is building an enormous big open data platform using sort of globally existing data science and technologies, but actually making it so specific for Africa, because in Africa, again, if you realize that about 70 to 80% of public transport in Africa is informal, is in matatus, in minibus taxis. And in order to connect those kind of systems to the formal public transport systems, you need a whole different approach to how you structure and access and make available the data that is being created around those transport movements. And there are no systems available globally from developed markets that can can cope with the scope and the nature of that kind of data. And so it's an African-born solution that is going to be very typical for African markets. And it's going to be useful across the globe. You'll see those innovations actually being exported out of Africa into the rest of the world.
Right. From a technology perspective, are there nuances that different pockets of the continent that will apply, for example, to East Africa that might not apply to West Africa? Is there a need for that distinction, or broadly speaking, are these technologies applicable across the board?
They're applicable across the board. You do see differences between the different pockets in Africa. So you see, for instance, a lot of concentration of say, prepaid energy services in East Africa, whereas in West Africa, you see a lot of development in agri-tech. And so in different pockets, you see different developments. But that is not to say, that's not because of that it doesn't have the same application in the field. It's just that the ecosystem around those solutions is a bit different in East Africa versus West Africa. Right. For instance, prepaid energy is very dependent on a wide coverage of mobile payment networks, and that coverage is better in East Africa than it is in West Africa. Whereas in West Africa, there's more advanced sort of systems around agricultural supply chains and distribution channels. So it's more logical. You would see more technology around those channels there.
Okay. In terms of then identifying these businesses, these opportunities that are tapping into this growth area, is there a specific country or region that investors are focusing on, or that you guys are focusing on in gaining access to these businesses?
Yes. Well, we've done some research, we've got a database of about 2,500 startups across Africa. And what is interesting is to see, of course, there are the typical hubs that everybody knows in Kenya and in Lagos and in Accra and also here in South Africa, in Johannesburg and in Cape Town. And roughly speaking, you would see about 2/3 of the activity in those hubs together. But you also see some really interesting emerging countries that are starting to show a lot of activity in these areas. Countries that you wouldn't even think of in first instance as countries like Ethiopia or Rwanda, or Uganda. And similarly here in more southern Africa, you see a lot of activity emerging in Zambia and in Mozambique. So it's pretty well spread across the continent. It's not just a geographical spread. What is also so interesting to see is that the quality of the startups and the quality of the teams and the quality of the solutions in the last, say, 2-3 years has really gone up significantly across the board in all of the geographies. And that really makes it very exciting to be in this space at the moment.
What's driving this increase in the quality? What's nurturing the ground for these entrepreneurs?
Well, on the one hand, you see, of course, there is an increasing focus on this also from universities, business schools. If you look at the startup ecosystem across Africa, there is a few years back, there were around 100 sort of tech hubs across Africa already. Now the number has risen to around 300. And so the support for the ecosystem is an important factor. Also the availability of funding, although that's still a big constraint for these type of startups, it is getting better. There you see a lot of international funders also starting to focus on Africa now and channeling more money there. And that together with the increasing opportunity to create digital solutions at much lower cost. The cost of building an app or the time involved in creating a new solution has come down significantly. A few years back, you would still need some 20 developers and a few years to develop a solution that now 2 developers in a few months can create with the kind of technology tools that are at their disposal. All of these things together, the ecosystem, the funding, and the ability to create digital content and distribute that digital content also through increasing sort of internet connections, smartphones, and other sort of smart ways of distributing those together.
It sounds like an exciting space to be in. You touched a little bit about financial services and mobile banking, prepaid electricity as another sector, and transportation. Is there any other industries or themes that are playing in the technology space that investors should be aware of?
Yes, one of the other things that makes Africa also really interesting is that the exciting stuff is happening where the sort of the digital meets the physical, and especially in commerce, we see some interesting developments there. There's another company I would want to cite as an example. It's called Nominini, who has developed this platform for informal retailers to be able to sell essentially digital services. And they are able to connect, again, these owners of spaza shops or kiosks to the formal banking system, to the formal e-commerce systems. And it is also just, if you imagine that all of the airtime, for instance, that is sold across Africa is all sold in the form of physical scratch cards of less than $1 value each. And the logistics behind it, the digital solutions that are being created now to change that whole system is typically African. The mobile revolution in Africa wouldn't have happened because of if it weren't for the physical scratch card. But being able to create a digital version of that speaks to the way that Africans use their mobiles is a typical African solution. And it's a really exciting way to do that.
Perfect. Let's leave it there. Thanks to my guest, Wim van der Beek, founder and managing partner of Goodwill Investments. That's all from Buy Africa this week. Remember to follow me on Twitter. That's @Mudiba_Tsepo, and send us your thoughts about the show using the hashtag Buy Africa. From myself and the team, goodbye.